On November 7th, voters in the Worcester and Middlesex District will go to the polls to select one of these three candidates, Democratic candidates, to move forward to the special election on December 5th to replace outgoing Senator Jennifer Flanagan. Those candidates are Leominster City Councilor Sue Chalifoux-Zephir, Fitchburg City Council President Michael Kushmerek, and Trustee of Health Alliance Clinton Hospital, Mike Mahan. For the next hour, these candidates will tell us a little bit about themselves, and we're going to talk about a wide range of issues that affect both the region and our Commonwealth. And the sooner I finish this introduction, the more time they're going to have to make their case. So let's get right to it, and we'll start with the easiest question of the episode, which is a standard interview question you get when you go for a job, which is just tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and what inspired you to run for state senate. And you were all on Natalie Higgins' program yesterday, so we'll keep it fair. We're going to do the opposite order, and we'll start with Mike Mahan.
Great. Kevin, thank you for having us on the show and for giving me the opportunity to speak this way. Just tell a little bit about myself. I was born and brought up in Leominster, where I still live with my wife Heather and our two daughters, Finna, who's 5, and Merrick, who's 2. Professionally, I'm a technology industry veteran, having worked in management consulting, finance and operations, mergers and acquisitions within the industry, and most recently I served as an executive at PeerBridge Inc., which is a software maker focusing on the shipping and logistics area. From a service perspective, I've served on the Board of Trustees at Fitchburg State University, Health Alliance Clinton Hospital, and municipally for the Leominster Planning Board and the Leominster Water and Sewer Commission. You know, public service for my family's a calling, and I'm no exception. My father's a longtime city councilor and former mayor of Leominster, my mother a Leominster city clerk, and my grandfather and his brother were both longtime state reps. One of the hallmarks that was taught by watching or hearing of those folks is helping families get the opportunities that they need to live healthy and happy lives. And that point really was driven home when I became a father, and I knew that it was then time that I needed to not just work on my family's behalf, but work on everyone's family's behalf.
Excellent. Council President Kushmerek.
Well, thank you again, Kevin, for this opportunity to speak with you and speak with the residents of the Worcester and Middlesex districts. I've served as a city councilor in Fitchburg for the past 4 years and council president as the past 2. And my career path has been dedicated to higher education thus far, serving 10 years in higher education, 8 years at Fitchburg State University, and the past 2 at Worcester Polytechnic Institute. And as an elected official, I've had the incredible privilege of serving alongside a number from our delegation, from Senator Flanagan, who I think we were incredibly privileged to have this past decade, plus serve this region, as well as now Mayor DiNatale and Representative Stephen Hay. And certainly I've gotten to see the incredible impact that an elected official can have on a region and on individual lives. And for me personally, I had the incredible opportunity to work with Jen Flanagan in great detail, but it was not the professional interaction with Jen Flanagan that impacted me the most, but rather the personal one. And being able to approach her as a constituent at a time of personal need and of family need, and see the level of responsiveness, and see how she interacted with her constituency, and see how she brought about a resolution to someone's life and to someone's situation. So seeing that and being the beneficiary of an elected official's time and efforts, I made a commitment to myself, and I made a commitment to the rest of my career of focusing on helping others. And if I could spend the rest of my career trying to have the impact that Senator Flanagan had on my life and my family, that would be a career well spent. And I realized that most in our state delegation, they spend each and every day doing that same thing for a different family and a different group of constituents. So that's certainly my hope, is that I can provide that same level of responsiveness and constituent services and representation in Boston each and every day for this district.
Thank you. Councilor Chalifoux-Zephir.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you very much for having us on today. This is a great opportunity to talk to people in Fitchburg so that they do get to know us. I got my start in public service over 20 years ago. You may remember that. We worked together on a very important environmental issue, protecting watershed land and water supply. And at that time, after that issue was successfully resolved, I went on to run for the Leominster City Council and have served on the council on and off over those 20 years. So I have, through my public service, I have been able to, certainly reach out to constituents in Leominster. And also in 2013, when Ginny White retired, I took over, my husband and I took over Ginny's Helping Hand in Leominster. And through that, we've really been able to deal with people across the region. We've seen firsthand the kinds of challenges and issues that people are facing. So that's what I've been doing for the last 4 years. I have a business degree and have worked in nonprofits, mostly as a business and production manager, so I certainly know my way around budgets. And that is something that I think, my municipal experience, my public service experience is very important, along with my work at Ginny's. And in terms of personal things, I grew up in Leominster. My husband and I still live there. We raised 3 girls, and I just recently became a grandmother.
Well, congratulations.
Little baby Winnie, yes. So, so it's keeping me busy.
Excellent. Good. As we know, Senator Flanagan, she had very high priorities around mental health issues and addiction issues. What would be your top priority as our next state senator, and how would you go about executing that priority and making the difference? Michael.
Sure. So the biggest priority for me would be education, public education and higher education. In particular, I've spent the past 10 years fighting for affordability and accessibility at a higher education level, and I'm a product of public schools myself, so it's both an area of passion and an area of personal experience as well. And we look at the state level, there was a Foundation Budget Review Commission conducted in 2015, and it determined through its recommendations that more than $1 billion should be allocated annually to public school systems and districts across the Commonwealth. And to date, we haven't seen a full implementation of those recommendations. So I'd be fighting tirelessly along with the rest of our delegation to ensure that those recommendations are implemented, as well as areas like our circuit breaker program that provide funding to essential special education programs. So ultimately, I think there's a wide range of issues and any number of areas of education, primary, secondary, and higher education that we need to continue to advocate for and strengthen in both funding and support. And my strategy to get there would truly be to make sure that we're working with the rest of our delegation. Representatives Hay and Higgins both serve on the Joint Committee on Higher Education, and they've been fearless advocates along those lines. And I think we need to continue to work with them, strengthen the delegation, make sure we're acting as one, and grow careful partnerships and collaborations across the Commonwealth and across the state legislature to ensure that we can put our money where our mouth is and make sure that we maintain our competitive edge in education in Massachusetts.
Sue?
Thank you. Education has been a real priority for me in my work on the City Council. I've been a strong advocate for increased increased funding for education, and have worked tirelessly and have been very vocal about that. So education is definitely a top priority. Working with the leadership, we do have a very strong delegation across the across the region. So North Central Massachusetts, I think we would work very well together and really get some movement and resolve the funding issue. One of the things I want to point out to people, because in looking and thinking about education funding, public education funding, I look at it because one perspective that I have is, we need to really alleviate the pressure that homeowners and taxpayers, property taxpayers, have been feeling. The state portion of funding for public schools has really dwindled over the last 15 years. And in order to help alleviate some of that pressure off of property taxpayers, we need to get the right funding structure in place. We need to fix the formula. We need to get that done. Transportation is another very important issue, as well as increased services for addiction and substance abuse treatment, along with mental health services. Senator Flanagan began some really good work on those issues, and that is something that, again, you know, I've seen up close and firsthand, and really understand the need for better, longer term, and more treatment for people that need it.
Mike?
Thank you. I have really 3 areas that I would focus on. The first is education. I think early childhood education is critically important, encouraging universal pre-K, universal full-day kindergarten, and I think those will make a difference. You know, through my work at Fitchburg State, we've seen the number of folks that come into the system who need remediation, and I think that if you get those students earlier and you get those students on a path to learning earlier, that will go down and to everyone's benefit. The other part of the education portion is post-secondary vocational training. There are a lot of folks in this region who are underemployed, who could be working at other jobs that are going unfilled. And I think if we work with the community colleges like Mount Wachusett Community College and to a certain degree Fitchburg State, we could focus our training, our workforce training, not only on our industrial base, which needs to keep, you know, our manufacturing base, which needs good workers and highly trained folks, but also other growth industries within Massachusetts.
Right.
The next one is public health. Through my work at Health Alliance Clinton Hospital, you know, I've seen that the opioid crisis needs to continue to be tackled head on, and there's really no other way about it. But what it's taught us is that there is a high degree of mental health needs that are going unmet within the region, and we need to advocate strongly for increased access. And you know, my strategy to do both of those things would be to work with the existing delegation to make sure that investments are going to worthwhile things like housing stock, early childhood education, as we mentioned, and you know, to really make sure that we're being fiscally responsible. There are budgetary constraints, and we need to be cognizant of those. But I think if we work together, we can get there.
Great, thank you. Let's get into some meat and potatoes now. The tragic events in Las Vegas have renewed the conversation in the country around gun control. So looking here at Massachusetts, which would be your purview as a state legislator, do you believe that gun regulations in Massachusetts are too strict? Or do we have too little regulation? Or are we at about where we should be? And if your answer is we need more regulation or less regulation, give specific examples of what you would like to see done as a legislature to change those laws. Sue?
Thank you, Kevin. Well, you know, as you perhaps know, the legislature this week passed a bipartisan bill that would ban bump stocks, which was, you know, a big part of the problem out in Las Vegas, a big part of that tragedy. And that was a bipartisan bill. Governor Baker has said that he will sign it. It will go to joint committee, and I am optimistic that that will be, you know, signed into law. In terms of overall gun restrictions in Massachusetts, I think we have pretty strong legislation in place. So at this point, I am satisfied that what we do have on the books is very strict, and I think it's appropriate for now.
Mike?
Sure. Massachusetts has some of the strongest gun laws in the country, and I think that's something for us to be proud of. I think we do a really nice job, though, balancing the rights of sportsmen and responsible gun owners with keeping folks safe. So I, in general, like the level of legislation that we have. I do applaud the legislature for taking up legislation to ban bump stocks and similar devices. And I think one more area that we really need to take a very serious look at, and it's going to be a long, hard discussion, is mental health and access to firearms. And my hope is that all sides of that argument can come to a table and hash out an agreement that will keep the most vulnerable safer.
Michael?
Massachusetts has been the leader in responsible gun ownership for decades, and as a result, I think our legislation is about where we need to be, particularly after the recent progression of the bump stock bill that is soon to be signed into law by Governor Baker. So I think we need to we need to have our focus spent on responsible gun ownership moving forward. leveraging the concerns of the Gun Owners Action League of Massachusetts and responsible gun ownership as it pertains to recreation and hunting opportunities, as well as the current safety level of Massachusetts, and making sure that we take into concerns, whether it's background checks for those with mental health issues or those with past criminal records. We need to make sure that we're leveraging those concerns and making sure that moving forward, we can allow for those who use guns for recreation and hunting to do so in a safe and responsible manner throughout our state.
There is a proposed constitutional amendment in the Commonwealth called the Fair Share Act, which would impose a 4% surtax on income of people making over $1 million a year. The supporters of this constitutional amendment say it will bring much needed revenue into the state, which would be earmarked towards education and transportation. The opponents say it will create a slippery slope toward a graduated income tax in this state. Do you support or oppose this constitutional amendment, Mike Mahan?
I believe in a progressive tax structure, no question about it. It's a way to raise revenue, and it's a way for us to be able to make critical investments in areas that have long been underfunded, as far as I'm concerned. You know, that point was really driven home to me not too long ago when we took a step back and Finna, our 5-year-old daughter, started her 3rd year of pre-kindergarten. And that's a head start that she's never going to get rid of. She will always have a head start academically. And I want all families in Massachusetts to have that for their children. And I think the progressive tax structure will be able to fund those kinds of improvements in our education system.
Michael?
So I too believe in a progressive tax structure, but let me be clear. I think taxation should always be the last resort, not the first one. And I think before we look to increase any additional funding revenue sources via tax, that we need to take a look internally within our budget and ensure that there's no inefficiencies that we haven't explored and been able to correct. I think ultimately, if this were to pass as a fair share amendment, and we were to implement a progressive tax structure, which would certainly require constitutional change in Massachusetts, that we look at earmarking those dollars where it's most needed and where the state legislature and governors, both this current and past one, have looked to, which is education and public infrastructure. There's some large needs in this state. We've already talked about some of those needs and some of those areas we need to spend funding. And we need to be able to be careful to allocate funding appropriately in those areas. I think education and public infrastructure are those two emerging costs that we really need to focus on. We've talked about raising tax dollars in the past. We look at tolls on the Mass Pike and on the Tobin Bridge that said we'd earmark towards public infrastructure, and the concern is always that we don't allocate those dollars once we raise the taxes. So I think before we do that, we need to ensure that we're fighting tirelessly to allocate those dollars appropriately so that there's a return on investment for every Massachusetts resident.
Sue?
Yes, absolutely. I do support the Fair Share Amendment, and for folks out there who may not know specifically what that is, it is a tax on income over $1 million. So for every dollar that a person makes over $1 million, there would be a 4-cent tax on that. I completely support it. I think we need to make those critical investments in education. We also need to make investments in infrastructure. Our roads are in terrible shape. We have bridges that are in terrible shape. We need to expand our public transportation. We need to expand our commuter rail. Commuter rail and public transportation out here, especially in the north central part of the state, is almost non-existent on weeknights and weekends. So we really need to do a better job at that so that people can get to work, so that students can get to classes. And the revenue raised from this amendment will be earmarked for education and transportation. And as state senator, I will make sure that that is earmarked, that that revenue is going to be spent exactly as it's been proposed. Some folks that are critical of the amendment, they worry, or they've raised the issue, millionaires will move out of the state. That hasn't happened. You know, there's been research that's been done on that, and I have a couple of links on my website. There are two at the bottom of my issues page. It's sue4senate.com. It's SUE4, the number 4, and two of the articles talk about research that's been done that proved that no, high earners do not leave the state. And then there's another interesting link that will bring you to a map that you can click on different communities, and it will show you the number of people affected in each community and also what they actually pay in terms of an average tax rate. You know, most people pay 5.1% on income, and high earners typically pay less than that. So it's just a very interesting bit of information that people can look into if they want some more information about that.
Very good. Thank you. During a campaign, the candidates in your organization spend a lot of time, a lot of money promoting your successes and your accomplishments, right? Candidates painting themselves in the best light they can.
We do?
Absolutely.
No.
So let's flip that around now. And I want each of you to tell the voters out there about a time where you failed at something. What was it? And how did you react and respond to that particular setback? Councilor Kushmerek.
Yeah, I think this is a great question because ultimately I think you can learn more through your failures and shortcomings than you can through your successes. And as a young councilor, early in my tenure as a city councilor going through the budget process, the council was trying to make budget cuts to make sure we had a more balanced budget. And in doing so, targeted a specific department for a number of cuts, of which there was an employee associated with such cuts. And while I was against cutting the line item for the employee that would have lost their job, and ultimately did, I gave this impassioned speech from the council chambers about why I thought we should retain that funding and ensure that this individual maintained employment in the city moving forward. Ultimately, the vote went in favor of the cut. This person lost their position with the city, and it was truly a learning lesson of you can be right, you can give the best, most impassioned speech, but if you can't convince others of that, regardless of how passionately you feel or how correct you may be on an issue, ultimately that doesn't help the end cause. So I learned there at that point that it was a learning lesson for me that I needed to spend more time working individually both with councilors. So it's not just speaking on behalf of the issue that I care deeply about. It's about working individually with councilors, making sure that everyone is equally and well informed about the issues, so that we never confront a situation like this again. For me, that was an individual lost their job, and there isn't a day that it goes by from the council chambers that I don't think about the ramifications of our actions. And that wasn't a situation where I felt I could get mad. I was disappointed, certainly. It's not about getting mad, it's about getting better, and it's about improving so that other people don't lose their jobs, so that funding that impacts each and every resident in our city or throughout this district gets the most for what they're paying in their tax dollars, and that their government is always working for them.
Thank you. Sue?
Well, in 2013, I ran for mayor in the city of Leominster and was not successful. I lost that race. And that was a huge learning experience. It was a wonderful experience. And what I did after that was I dusted myself off and continued to advocate in Leominster. I serve on the Library Board of Trustees, and I sat out 2 years. And then I re-ran for the City Council in 2015 and was reelected. And I kept doing the things that I really care about, the things that I'm most passionate about. And at the time when I ran for mayor, I thought that we needed to we needed to restructure our priorities, our spending priorities. And I thought we needed to invest more in our schools, and still feel that way. And that's why on the City Council I've been a very outspoken advocate for more funding for our public schools. And that's why I'm running for the state senate. I think we need to invest more in public education. I think we need to really fix that problem and make other critical investments throughout North Central Mass. And that's why that's what I learned, and that's why I'm running for the Senate.
Mike?
Sure. In 2006, I left my career in management consulting and I went to business school, like a lot of folks do on that path. Well, we all know what happened in 2007, and the economy dropped out the bottom dropped out of the economy because of the housing bubble. And so 2008 rolls around when I'm graduating from business school, and there are no jobs, not a single job. So it was a long time before I was able to find that gainful employment, and it was not at a level that I anticipated going into school. And it really taught me a hard lesson in that I have had a lot of opportunities and I've had a lot of privilege, and I understand that. And that economic recession was very hard on me. I couldn't imagine how it was on others, that the ramifications were more amplified. And it really caused me to say to myself, I want to dedicate my time and my resources to making this region better and to helping others get out of situations like that.
So with any of you, that the failure that you faced, would you, looking back on it, would you handle it any differently? And if so, how would you handle it? Anyone? Go ahead.
I don't know that I would handle the campaign any differently, honestly, because I felt, and to this day feel, that we ran a really good campaign. I was very proud of the campaign that we ran. It was positive. We had a lot of excitement. I thought we were talking about very important issues. So I wouldn't handle that any differently. I mean, obviously I was disappointed with the outcome, but would I do anything differently? I maybe start earlier. You know what? I had a daughter that was getting married in June of that year and was very focused on that and my family. And had I started earlier, the outcome might have been different. So that's one thing I may have done a little differently.
For me, I certainly would have voted the way I did, which was to retain the funding line item that would have retained the employee within the city. Ultimately, I think my strategies and my tactics would have been different. Some of it was a learning lesson. Some of it was inexperience and having to go through the process the first time. Other parts of it were, learning from the experience and making sure that I got better and that I took different tacks. So certainly, since then, I've made sure to work, individually, not just collectively as the body, around the table and casting a vote and trying to give an impassioned speech. It's about, making sure each counselor understands the issues, intimately well, and making sure that I'm advocating for my position and my vote every step along the way, not just around the table.
Mike?
Sure. I would have sought to go into full-time public service sooner if I could do it all over again, because I think I could have been making more of an impact in certain other places over this 8 or 9 year time period, and that's ultimately the goal. So
Very good. Great answers, some great insights from our candidates so far, both on issues and who you are as people, and that's important information for voters. This program is going to be broadcast on a variety of different platforms. If you are watching on a local cable access station, and there are going to be many of them, some of them are broadcasting the full hour, some are going to break it up into 2 parts because they only have half-hour slots. So if you are watching on local cable, depending on which city or town you're in, this program may cut away now. If it does, you can watch the full episode, the full hour, and we have a lot more to talk about. You can go to our YouTube channel, FLAPTV, or you can go to our Facebook group, Fitchburg-Leominster All Politics, which is on Facebook, or you can also check your listings with your local cable provider to see when they will be playing part 2. So for some of you, you may be cutting away right now. For others, we're going to go to a quick break, and then we will be back with part 2 of our candidates forum with the Democratic candidates for the Worcester and Middlesex Senate seat. Stay with us. Hello and welcome to part 2 of our candidates forum with the Democratic candidates for State Senate for the Worcester and Middlesex District. There is a primary election coming up on November 7th where voters will narrow down this field of 3 of City Councilor Sue Chalifoux-Zephir of Leominster, City Council President Mike Kushmerek of Fitchburg, and the trustee of Health Alliance Clinton Hospital, Mike Mahan. One of these 3 candidates will move on to the special election on December 5th to face Republican Dean Tran and Claire Frieda, who has qualified for the ballot as an unenrolled candidate. So this is part 2 of our special. If you are just joining us from a local cable access station that already played part 1 and you missed it, you can watch the first part where we had some great discussions about these candidates, a little bit about their biographies and backgrounds, and talked about some great issues. You can go to our YouTube channel, FLAPTV, and catch the first part of the show. You can also go to our Facebook group, Fitchburg-Leominster All Politics, and we will have the full hour there also. And on the YouTube channel, all episodes of FLAPTV are available for 24/7 streaming. So we're going to jump back into this. Again, we've already done a half hour, so we're going to ask some more great questions to learn what voters can expect from our candidates. The Massachusetts legislature is currently considering a controversial immigration bill. The Safe Communities Act would prevent local and state law enforcement officials from arresting people based on their immigration status, holding immigrants to comply with detainers from U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and deputizing officers to serve as immigration agents. The legislation would also bar Massachusetts agencies from sharing information with any federal program creating such a registry. So what are your thoughts around the Safe Communities Act? Sue Chalifoux-Zephir.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. I do support the Safe Communities Act. I think law enforcement officials, local law enforcement people that I've talked to, they're stretched pretty thin. Their budgets are very tight and they have their hands full. And honestly, I think that local law enforcement should focus on local law, enforcing local ordinances. I don't think that we should turn our local police officers and others into, a deportation force that works for the federal government. I mean, we don't have the resources to do that. They don't reimburse us for those costs. And there are certain liability issues, I think, that are associated with that when we act, or if we have people acting, as federal agents. And also, folks that I've talked to in law enforcement have said that, trust is a very important part of the relationship that they build in communities. So, they have to build relationships within the communities so that they can be successful in policing on the streets. And if people are afraid in the communities that they are going to be, held up or deported, they'll be much less likely to have those kinds of relationships or build those kinds of relationships with law enforcement. So I do support the Safe Communities Act. I don't think that we should turn local law enforcement people into a federal deportation force, and would listen to our local law enforcement agencies on that score.
Mike Mahan?
Sure. I think each immigration case is different, and they all come with their different challenges and issues. I think it's critical that our law enforcement agencies across the spectrum work together to keep us all safe. That being said, I think that local police forces should focus their attention, resources, and energy on the local communities, and the federal government should be enforcing the immigration type laws. I have a real issue with disrupting a hardworking family who is just looking for a better life, or creating some kind of registry, which I find disgusting.
Councilor Kushmerek?
So I am very strongly in favor of the core tenets of much of the Safe Communities Act. I have a couple of concerns based around some of the language of the bill, making sure that our municipalities and towns have representation in making this decision moving forward. So while I would support the bill, I would like to, to see some change or modification to the existing language at this point. That said, I think we should not be deputizing our local police office to enforce federal immigration law. Not only do we have an issue of resourcing our local municipal law enforcement agencies. But we also need to continue along the lines of the community policing model that many of our towns and cities have adopted over the past decade. We're building trust, we're building collaboration and partnerships within our communities, and we need to continue to do that. We need to empower our police departments to work hand in hand with our partners in the community, and we need to make sure that we're not undermining their efforts. Ultimately, in Fitchburg, we see a large first-generation population that feel this is disproportionately targeting them. And I think to them, we need to say that you're an important part of our community. We value you, and we want you to stay here and continue contributing to our communities, to our culture, and to our economy. You're an important piece of that, and we don't want you to feel like you're not welcome in your own community and in your own home. So I think we need to support them through legislative efforts to ensure that first-generation Americans, immigrants, looking to find safe ways to citizenship have that opportunity to do so.
So we have 49 states in the country that have a seatbelt law. And the reason we have 49 states that have a seatbelt law is because the federal government says if you don't, you'll lose all highway funding, federal highway funding. So the state of New Hampshire says, live free or die. We're going to stick to our values, and we're not going to have a seatbelt law, and they're going without their federal highway funding. The federal government now, the current administration, is threatening local cities and towns and states that if they become sanctuary cities, if they pass legislation like this, that the federal government will cut off federal funding to those cities and towns and to those states, which will impact a lot of the priorities that that you as candidates have talked about, whether it be education or transportation or addiction issues. So if that were to happen, if the federal government got their way and said that if Massachusetts passes this, a lot of federal funding is in jeopardy, does that change your opinion on this? And do we then say, hey, they forced our hand and we have to have local police be cooperating with the federal government, or do we stand our ground? Anyone?
I'd say we stand our ground. If the federal government wants to threaten taking away, I don't know what kind of federal funds it would be, but no, absolutely not. I think states should be able to police their communities in the way that they see appropriate. And the Safe Communities Act, protecting first generation people, protecting people that are here, I fully support that. And no, it would not change my thinking. No.
Anyone else? Federal government has the proverbial gun to your head. What do you do?
The funding model that has most often been threatened or talked about is our community development block grants issued by the Housing and Urban Development Division of the U.S. government. And ultimately, that would undermine their own efforts because that funding source often provides, for community policing and for changes within a community that typically make communities safer and more accessible. So I find that ironic that they'd be targeting funding sources that would ultimately undermine this administration's stance. That said, I don't think we can be held hostage by the federal government in terms of our funding. I think we need to act in the best interest of our state and the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and our individual communities. I think that's essential. Ultimately, it'll be a Supreme Court decision that would ultimately weigh in. So I think, we need to make our decision on what we feel is the right way to go, and then ultimately the courts would weigh this decision heavily. So we can't be reactive to a threat from the federal government.
Did you want to chime in, Mike?
I full agreement. I think that we decide that this is the path that we're going to go down. We go down it. We deal with the ramifications. We let the courts sort it out, and we move forward from there when we know exactly what the impacts and ramifications may be, so that we can get on with life and still have citizens and residents that are feeling taken care of.
Right. One of the great things about running a political group on Facebook and hosting the show is really being able to keep the finger on the pulse of the community. And what you hear from political candidates and what you hear from local residents a lot when they say, what is the issue that is affecting you most? They're saying road conditions. The roads are horrible. So, a lot of those road repairs, infrastructure improvements are funded through what's called Chapter 90 funds from the state. And that's funded primarily through the gas tax. And cars are becoming more efficient now, fuel efficient, which means we are taking in less revenue from the gas tax. So is there any instance where you would consider voting for an increase in the gas tax to provide more Chapter 90 funds to fix more roads? And if not, if you're going to take a gas tax increase off the table, what ideas would you have to bring more money from the state into the cities and towns to address the conditions of our roads? Mike Mahan.
Sure. I agree that roads and bridges across the district, across the Commonwealth, and really across the country are in abysmal condition. The infrastructure investments have not kept pace with the need by any measure. That said, I do not support an increase in the gas tax. I think about the hardworking residents of this district, some of whom are driving 40, 50, 60 miles each way to get to the opportunities that they need to get to support their families. And this would be raising revenue on their backs. And our region has already paid a disproportionate amount through tolls and through the existing gas tax for road projects that have overwhelmingly been completed in the eastern part of the state. So I think it's time that while Mass DOT is doing a fantastic job with those projects, it's time that we start pulling some of those projects out to our way. And that's one of the reasons that I support a progressive tax structure, is to be able to fund some of these improvements that way.
Michael.
Chapter 90 funds, no doubt, are a crucial source of funding for towns and municipalities to improve their infrastructure. We've seen a disproportionate cut against inflation, if you really look at it in terms of Chapter 90 funding to municipalities, and we need to find ways to continue our improvement and long-term investment in both the public infrastructure and mass transportation. That said, I mentioned before, I don't believe that tax is the first place that we should start. I think it should be a last resort. There's no graver measure that a legislature can take than deciding to levy taxes. That's one of the most powerful things a legislature can do, and I think that should be a last resort for us. So I look at how do we fund, continued improvements that make us more competitive economically and through mass transportation. I think we look at, I said earlier I'd favor a progressive tax model as well, and that if we're going to move in that direction, I think that would be the first place that we look at earmarking those funds towards public infrastructure and public education. So I'd look to see, can we first accomplish the changes and the investments that we need in our infrastructure system via progressive tax structure before we then go to a tax gas. I'm really concerned about whenever we say we're earmarking tax dollars to a specific cause, because ultimately that so rarely happens. Again, I'll point to the Mass Pike, and I'll point to the Tobin Bridge and other tolls throughout the Commonwealth, and the idea was always to earmark them to improve those individual projects, and that's failed to happen. And we need to ensure that if we're looking at a gas tax, which I wouldn't be in favor of at this time, that ultimately that it does exactly what we're saying it's going to do, which is go directly to fund public infrastructure on top of current budget line allocations, not in replacement of those dollars that are already allocated.
Sue?
I would not support an increase in the gas tax. I think that the burden would fall on working families, again, throughout our region that are trying to get themselves to work, get their kids to school, get themselves to school. So I would not support an increase in the gas tax. I do support, again, the Fair Share Amendment, which would raise almost $2 billion for investments in public education and transportation. Those kinds of investments are desperately needed. Chapter 90 money just does not adequately address those. So no, I would not support an increase in the gas tax at this time, and but would look for other ways to generate revenue to make those investments that are critical.
Very good. The lawmakers on Beacon Hill are considering a bill designed to reduce the number of opioid overdose deaths by authorizing supervised injection facilities where those suffering from addiction would be able to consume pre-obtained drugs under the supervision of a healthcare professional. There's been some hearings on Beacon Hill and has gotten some surprising support so far. There seems to be some movement behind it. Obviously a very controversial very controversial idea, but they said, you know, desperate times call for desperate measures sometimes, so that's the tack that some people are taking. What would be your thoughts on the bill of supervised injection facilities, Councilor Kushmerek?
The opioid epidemic has deeply affected every community throughout the Commonwealth, and disproportionately North Central Massachusetts and the Worcester and Middlesex district. And I think we need to examine every option and make sure that we're taking a holistic approach to this epidemic and ensuring that we don't continue to lose an entire generation of Massachusetts residents and of Americans. You know, this is an issue that's personally touched my family and my own personal network, like I'm sure it has so many others. I don't think there's enough information about safe injection facilities yet for us, and for me in particular, to make an informed decision. We've looked at, there's models right now in New Zealand and in Vancouver, Canada, that are looking at safe injection and have implemented them. But I think we need to examine that data closely. I think the concerning part is there's lives at stake here, and I'm concerned about running a real-time experiment with people's lives and of treatment. So I need to put the trust in the medical community and of substance abuse counseling community, as well as law enforcement, to see how do we best combat this. So I'm not saying no to it, but I'm saying I don't think we have enough data to make an informed decision at this time. Ultimately, whatever the path forward is to tackling this issue, we need to take a holistic approach, spanning every aspect of our government and community, and we need to make sure that we're collaborating in tandem. There's no one singular answer that's going to fix this problem. We have a long road ahead, but we need to make sure that we're addressing it head on, removing the taboo and stigma associated with substance abuse so that we can talk about it in an open setting and ensure that we're looking and working towards ultimately a cure.
Sue?
Opioid addiction and substance abuse treatment, you know, it's just such a huge problem. I've had the same mother come to me within the last 4 months, you know, with looking for treatment for her addicted son, you know, who's addicted to heroin. Started off with a hockey injury in high school, became addicted to opioids, is now a serious heroin addict. And, you know, twice I've gotten him, you know, through working through Senator Flanagan's office and working through other local people, gotten him into treatment, but there isn't enough treatment to go around. The supervised injection facilities is, I'm not sure that is right for our region at the moment. I know that Mass Medical Society, I think, is supportive of the idea. I would need more information about that to see what the long-term results are. You know, I understand the concept that you deal with addicts, you know, in their space while they're using, and you try to help them and understand, you know, that this is a path forward, that this is a way that they can turn their life around, you know, all within that environment. And I think I'm interested in the idea. I think I just need more information about it, and I'd really like to see how that concept works, you know, over, you know, some time period. So I am not opposed to it, certainly, but I would definitely want more information about it. And it is, again, you know, I'm going to go back to, you know, we need to treat people, you know, where they are. We need to get them on the longer term road to sobriety.
Mike?
So public health, as I mentioned in the intro, is one of my highest priorities. And I think that we need to have a renewed focus on intervention, education, and treatment. I've done a lot of research on secure injecting sites and supervised injecting sites, and I have not seen any data that would suggest that this gets at the root of the problem. It does solve the public nuisance of illicit drug use, but I really think that we need to be creating a path to treatment for folks suffering with addiction, and I do not believe that these facilities necessarily do that. You know, one of the last things Senator Flanagan did before she resigned was take a trip up to Vancouver. And I've spoken to her at length about this, and I've seen the pictures that she took and everything. And once folks get in this system, you know, get in the once folks start using these facilities, the number of folks that go into treatment is very low. And I think that's the opposite of what we want to be trying to do. So I would advocate that more of our tax dollars and our public health dollars be spent towards intervention, education, and prevention.
As we've said a couple times on this program, at the beginning of Part 1 and Part 2, on November 7th, voters in the Worcester-Middlesex District will go to the polls and select one of you three as the Democratic candidate to move on to the special election on December 5th. A lot of times in Massachusetts, there is an assumption that if you win the Democratic primary, that's the hard part, and then it's a cakewalk from there. Can we all agree it's probably not the case this time, right? Whoever moves forward on December 5th is going to be facing Dean Tran, the Republican candidate, very popular city councilor in Fitchburg, consistent top vote getter, and also City Councilor Claire Frieder of Leominster, who is the longest serving elected official in the city of Leominster, right? Consistently winning elections, who is qualified for the ballot as an unenrolled candidate. So to close out this FLAP in Focus special, I'd like each of you to make your case to the voters why you are the strongest Democrat to go up against these two candidates and why they should select you to be the Democratic nominee for the next, to be the next state senator for the Worcester-Middlesex District. Sue?
Thank you, Kevin. You know, my experience, my city council experience, my experience working in nonprofits, my experience as executive director of Ginny's Helping Hand, I think is really unique. And I've seen people across the region. I understand what their concerns are. I understand what they're facing, what they're up against. And I think that experience is really what sets me apart from other candidates. You know, I've been an advocate. I've been on the city council. I've worked with, you know, the municipality. I know my way around a budget. I've worked in nonprofits for many years as a business and production manager. And I think that experience combined with my local municipal experience really does set me apart. I also support raising the minimum wage to $15 over 4 years. I think that's something that working people throughout the region really care about. I think it's something they need, and that is something that I will absolutely support and you know, work for on their behalf. You know, I've also, you know, the candidate who's talking about expanding transportation opportunities and public transportation opportunities. That's something that's very important to regional development. Getting rail and passenger service out to Gardner is a very important priority, and I think that's something that I will work on, you know, with our federal officials as well as with my colleagues in the State House. So I support the Fair Share Amendment. I think we need to make those investments, and I think that the Fair Share Amendment is a very fair, yeah. It's a reasonable way to, you know, raise that revenue to make those critical investments. So that's why I think I believe I'm the strongest candidate in the race, and will be a very strong candidate in the general election. So I would ask the people of City of Fitchburg and throughout the community, you know, I need your vote on November 7th, and need your support to move ahead to the December 5th election. And I respectfully ask for that.
Mike?
Sure. Thank you, Kevin. My background is in business, essentially, and I'm the only candidate that has business executive experience, as well as seeing the needs of the region through my work with the administrations of two of the largest organizations in the region. I think that gives me a unique perspective on the needs and the issues that the region is facing. Over the past couple of years, I've traveled the district with Senator Flanagan, and I've heard from town administrators and mayors and leadership about what the issues are. I've also spoken with our friends and neighbors about what the everyday issues are. And I think my background as an executive working collaboratively and as a fiscal agent in healthcare and public higher education, where, you know, two of my highest priorities lie, give me an opportunity to really be a strong voice for this region in the state Senate. On November 7th, I ask for your vote. You can visit electmikemahan.com if you need more information about me, and feel free to reach out, and I'd be happy to speak. Thank you.
Councilor Kushmerek?
We've spoken about working Americans and about the middle class in America, and I think that's something that the Democratic Party has forgotten about over the past couple of years, and I think we need to shift that emphasis and that focus back to working Americans, back to creating successful pathways to the middle class. I didn't grow up in the middle class. I grew up with a family, of 5 children and a working class father, as a laborer and a stay-at-home mother. And I remember growing up on food stamps and on welfare and receiving fuel assistance, and my parents having to leverage the difference between providing a nice Christmas for their children or paying a utility bill. And I don't forget about that. I don't forget about where I came from, and I think of myself as fortunate that myself and my siblings were able to pull ourselves out of that opportunity and provide the right kind of life for our next generation, like our parents did for us. So I don't forget about that as I evaluate my decisions and as I cast a vote, whether it's at the municipal level or as your next state senator. I think that we need to continue that focus of making sure that those who have achieved that status and have been able to get themselves to the middle class, that we continue to protect and continue to fight for them so that they can enjoy the opportunities that they have. And for those that aren't yet there, and for those who feel that they're left behind, I think we need to continue to fight for them and to provide them the opportunities to get to the middle class and to continue to contribute to the economy like they have in so many ways. Regardless of the letter next to your name, I think we need to continue to focus on collaboration. So regardless of Democrat, Republican, or Independent, as a city councilor in Fitchburg, I've made sure that I've collaborated with my colleagues and along with my mayor to ensure that at all times the residents that we represent feel that their district is moving forward. And that's the same level of collaboration, of communication, and representation that you can count on moving forward. So on November 7th, I ask for your support to allow me to continue representing you and to help move the Worcester and Middlesex district forward. You can find more information about me at Kushmerek, FORSenate.com. Thank you.
Very good, all 3 candidates. And we learn a lot about a person by the type of phone they have. So Apple or Android?
Apple.
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 Unanimous.
What about you?
How about you?
Apple.
All right.
There's 2 types of cell phones in the world. There's iPhones and then everything else. Everything else.
Absolutely.
All right.
I agree with you.
All right. So, by a show of hands, which one of you is going to be back here after November 7th at this table with Dean and Claire? Got some confidence at the table, huh?
My picture on put those, yeah.
Can't vote twice. I know you're a Democrat, but you can't vote twice. Great. So, to our viewers out there, if you've learned anything about these candidates, about who they are as people, about where they stand on issues, then they did their job here today. So now it's time for you to do your job. And that job is to go out there on November 7th, whether it's 80 degrees and sunny or we're having a nor'easter. You need to get out there and vote. It's important. One of these 3 candidates will move on December 5th and again face City Councilor Dean Tran, the Republican candidate from Fitchburg, and City Councilor Claire Frieda, an unenrolled candidate from Leominster. Once the Democratic candidate is chosen on November 7th, we will invite all of those candidates back here to ask even more questions on even more issues. I thank all 3 candidates for your candid responses. I think you all did a great job. And you can catch the full hour of this program as well as all episodes of FLAPTV on our YouTube channel at FLAPTV or our Facebook group where you can join the discussion 24/7 in political debate, Fitchburg-Leominster All Politics on our Facebook group. For now, that ends this edition of Flap in Focus. Thanks to our guest again, City Councilor Susan Chalifoux-Zephir, Fitchburg City Council President Michael Kushmerek, and Mike Mahan, Trustee of Health Alliance Clinton Hospital. I'm Kevin Cormier. Thank you for joining us. Bye-bye.